my home, built by my father, Gaither Williams, was next door to Grandma and Granddad, Elizabeth Hicks and Aunt Williams. And I saw them practically every day when they were, the weather permitted, or we could walk out on the road and go talk to them. But they were always busy, busy, busy. They had the farm, they had their animals, and he was busy. If anybody died in the community, he would go, she would go too, and then she would cook for them. And when I came from Sunday school on Sundays, we had our service at Sunset Gap. That didn't last long, but we had it for a few years. And she would always have a loaf of bread and some jelly for us. I remember that exactly. But I lived next door to him and her until they both died. I was right by her bedside when she died. And Uncle Walt, and Aunt Lyon lived there at the time, next door to us. But my grandmother, Elizabeth or Betty Jane Hicks Williams, was a very stern, strict person, and you did not push her around. And she would tell you how to do something, and she didn't change it. And as far as her reading and writing, I saw her look at magazines and things that Grandpa had, particularly his law book, because he read the law. But I never saw her write anything except she would draw something. I saw her draw things, but I never saw her write anything. So to me, she could read and write, so that's all I know. But my grandfather, Aunt Williams, was a person known to read the law. And what that meant, I don't know. He was not a graduate from any law school, but he had a book that came from Congress. It was special built with steel pins in it, and he could open it up and insert the supplementals that they sent him by mail. And anybody that wanted to hear about the Constitution or a new law passed, they came to him, and he read it to them. So I know he could read and write. And he would perform community services, fiddle playing for community services, funerals, weddings, family gatherings, or wherever they asked him. And if he got paid for it, I never heard of that. Back then, people just helped each other and did, because he did play the fiddle, and he played a lot of religious songs as well as I call bluegrass. And he would be gone from time to time, like 2 or 3 days at a time, and I never asked where he was. I just always heard he was working in the community. And what he was doing, I don't know. But the people came to him if they had a law question. I remember that very well. But like I said, I don't know if he was considered a constable or a deputy or what. Nobody ever said. But as far as Grandma's ability to read and write, I saw her pick up books, and I saw her talk to Grandpa about the letters he got from Congress to put in his little famous book he had. And I can only describe it, and it was very difficult and heavy to pick up. But she would look through that, so I know she could read that. I don't know how well she understood it, but they talked about it. So if she had questions, she went to him.
I started coming up here in 2015 or 2016, when we moved the food pantry down to the lower part, and I've been a volunteer ever since. That's been several years, but we went through a lot of people, a lot of volunteers, and a lot of good people, a lot of kids from other states has come and helped us and done an excellent job. We've got maybe 200 or more a year that will show up and help during school breaks. and a lot of them from Illinois, got a lot from Kentucky. We've got some from, a lot of volunteers from Florida. But that's it up till today. We're here every Wednesday. Doing the pantry work is excellent. It gives you a good feeling to know that you're helping a lot of people in our poor county out, because it's not the richest county in the state, but it's good to know. Makes you have a good feeling when you leave. If you stay up here 5 hours, you stay up here 6 hours, or you stay up here 2 hours, it gives you a good feeling. And the people really seem like they appreciate it. So that's it. And we've got an excellent lady to work for. Audrey has really been good to us volunteers. Anytime we ask anything, she'll tell us. And that's about as good as you can go on that. We had a group, we had the governor's wife, Maria, and a group of volunteers out of Nashville come up and help us one day, and it was, I mean, cold that day. It was absolutely cold that day. I've got a picture in my phone of me and her down there, and she said, "I'm froze to death." I said, "I am too." That was last year. It's been a year. It'll be a year this when it gets in cold weather. But she is a fine seeming lady. She was nice to us and worked good, better than I did. But Governor Lee's wife, Maria, right? Maria. And several of her staff worked with us. And maybe five or six of them worked with us. And that was a good. The biggest group we had was out of Illinois. There was like 40 of them, and we just got back out of the way and let them do the work. But they was good workers. So they was about half girls and boys, college students, and they were good. We really met some nice people.
Hey, it's Dan again. Another story that I remember was being involved with our Boy Scout troop, Troop 291. My dad was a scoutmaster, and I was pretty young in there, but I was a quartermaster, so I was in charge of the food. And we had this little pup tent that I was in, and at the feet area I had the food, and I was at the near the door area, and we were out on a camp out, and it rained that night, and all the guys set up their tents with the doors facing up instead of down. So when the water ran off the hill, it ran right into my tent, and I slept right through it until some of the other fellows woke me up, and they said, "Hey Dan, we're heading to the van." And I said, "What for?" And they said, "Well, our tents are flooded." And I said, "Well, I'm okay." And they said, "No, you're not. Look down." And I looked at my feet, and I had a big puddle down there. And so we all headed to the van for the rest of the night, and learned a lesson on how to put up a tent in the future, door down so that the water will go around. So that was interesting. One time we were fishing at scout camp. We went to a camp called Camp Buck Tom's, and it was in Roane County, probably a couple hours from here or so. But when we weren't in merit badge classes in the evenings and things, a couple of my buddies and I would go fishing out on the lake or along the lake bank, and And every once in a while we would see boats go by, and it would get late and it would be dark. And so we were just young guys, maybe 13, 14, 15 years old. So we didn't know any better, and we would hear a boat coming by, and we would get our flashlights and we would aim them towards the boat. And somebody didn't like that, because the boat came towards us, and as they got closer we could see that they were wearing sheets, white sheets. And so that made us think of an organization that might not be friendly to scouts, with the Ku Klux Klan. We didn't know that for sure because we didn't stick around. We ran and got back to our camp and realized we'd left all of our equipment there, but we weren't about to go back. Equipment, fishing rods and tackle boxes and things like that. So the next day we went back to our fishing spot and everything was gone. And we learned another valuable lesson. Don't be flashing flashlights at people you don't know in the middle of the night out on a lake. So learned the lesson. And we all survived that one. Another great story was scouting. We had a dinosaur egg hunt contest, and we had a few of us there at scout camp, and a couple of us knew a lot more about nature than I did, and so they could identify the differences in sugar maples and other kind of maples, maple tree leaves and things. So one of the things was you had to identify this leaf, and one of the boys took the leaf and put it in his mouth and chewed it up, and he said, "That's a sugar maple," and he was right. So we won enough of those contests to where we won a watermelon for our troop. So that was pretty cool. And another opportunity at scout camp was the watermelon fight contest at Camp Buck Tom's, and I guess we were all about 15, and there were 2 or 3 of us from our troop in there, and there was probably about 20 boys, and we all had to grease up, and then they threw a watermelon out 15 feet away, and they said, "Okay, go get it." And so we were all after the watermelon, and I got to it, and me and about 3 other guys or 4 other guys had our arms wrapped around the watermelon, thinking we were going to, each of us had it, and the watermelon kind of broke up, but I had the biggest piece, so they gave us a watermelon. So that was pretty cool. So loved scout camp. My dad was our scoutmaster, and we just had the best time, and earned merit badges and learned things we didn't know before, and had lots of opportunities we might not have had if we hadn't been involved. But so that's scouts, you know. Grew up to be an Eagle, so that was good. And my son got into scouts when he was 12, and he made it to life before football, high school football, got him away. So, but life was good growing up at Sunset Gap.
Here's a story you may like. Back when I was probably around 13, this was probably back when Kenny Morgan was the director, I was taking people's names on what was probably a July 4th celebration. And what we would do is we'd collect all the names, put them in a container, and what we had is what I'm going to call it a money booth. It looked like a telephone booth, and you put somebody in there, and you had some loose cash in there, turn on the fans, and all the money would spin around, and you had to catch as much of it as you can, put it in a slot, and at the end of a minute or however much time, you got to keep what you had put in the box. So I was taking people's names, they would write it down, put it in a little container, and my mom asked me, "Well, why don't you put your name in there?" And I was first hesitant, but eventually she did persuade me to write my name and put it in there. And there was probably 100 or more names in there, and I was also the one to pull the names back out again, read it, and announce who got to go in the money booth. The first time I pulled one out, it was some random boy, A little later, I pulled another name out. Me. When I pulled it out, I thought first, hey, maybe I could just put it back in because I didn't want the same person announcing who gets to go in there, announcing themselves. Felt it was a little dishonest, but of all the chances, it just happened to be me. So I felt as if I could just put it back in there, but I suddenly realized at that moment, if I put my name back in there, nobody's going to believe that I put my own name back in there, and they would think I have a grudge against somebody else. So, put it back up, and I said, you're never going to believe this, but it's me. And then, of course, the people in the auditorium laughed, and there was no problems that arise. I didn't get too much money in there. It's a lot harder than you would think to grab money that's going everywhere around you all at once. But I learned a lesson that day. Don't write down your own name in something you're participating in. You just might win.
And my dad's story that I want to share with you is about his salvation. So my dad went to school at Sunset Gap from 1st grade to 8th grade, and there were mission work groups that would come and minister in the area. Most of them from up north, but they could be from anywhere. This particular summer, when my dad was in the 6th grade, one of the mission workers asked him if he wanted to pray and ask Jesus to come into his heart. And my dad said yes, he did want to pray. So some of the work camp group staffers led him down the steps from the old kitchen, and he said he knelt onto the grass and asked Jesus to be his Savior. And Sunset Gap for us is all about stories, and it's all about memories, and that is one of our special stories and special memories about Dad getting saved at Sunset Gap. And Sunset Gap is a big part of our family's spiritual heritage and spiritual history. So I hope you enjoyed that story about Dad accepting Jesus as his Savior. And now, as part of our family's history with Sunset Gap, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my mom. Her name is Becky Williams. She was a Bryant, that was her maiden name, and she and Dad got married in 1960. And as soon as she and Dad got married, Mom started volunteering at Sunset Gap. They lived over near Sunset Gap, and of course my dad had a history with Sunset Gap, so my mom started volunteering up there in different roles. But my brother was born in 61, my sister in 63, and me in 64. So by May of 1965, my mom had officially joined the staff of Sunset Gap as the thrift shop coordinator. And at this point, she has functioned as the thrift shop coordinator for 60 years. She doesn't work every day or even every week or even every month as she did in the beginning, because she's 82 years old now, but she still has worked at Sunset Gap for a very, very long time. And in addition to being the thrift shop coordinator, she would also cook for the work camp groups, the summer groups that would come to do ministry work in the area or ministry work at the center. She would cook for them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a different segment, but our family has a long history with Sunset Gap, and it is a really special place for all of us. So we'll talk more about the other later.
Okay, the next story is about Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. And scouting was a big thing when I was little. Daddy was the Boy Scout leader, and Mama was the Girl Scout leader for years. And then the Girl Scouts got taken over by whoever was on the summer staff for that year. So it freed up Mama to have a full-time job outside of Sunset Gap. So all during my growing up years, Daddy would take the Boy Scouts anywhere and everywhere, it seemed like, so that they could have all these wonderful experiences. And the Girl Scouts got to stay around Sunset Gap and or Cosby Park. I can remember going overnights there. So it was decided one year that the Girl Scouts would go to Virginia Beach. And that was a great opportunity because most of the girls that were in the troop at that time, which included Carol Ann Stewart and Gaynell Stewart and Judy Webb, Chrissy and I were both in that troop. Barbara Webb was in that troop, and other local girls that went to Cosby. And so we took off in the van, in the Sunset Gap van, and I can remember all the luggage. We took the back seat out of the van, but I can remember all the luggage was piled up in the very, very back. And there were some of us girls that would go back to the very back and just lay across the luggage while we were traveling. That was before seatbelts were mandated, obviously, but that was a very fun part of that trip. But we would sing, and Mom would teach us some other songs, some hiking songs or camping songs or traveling songs, and anywhere we went, Mom would be singing in any vehicle. So we got to Virginia Beach, and like I said, it was the first time that many of the girls had ever seen the ocean, and so we decided to go swimming, not knowing that the beach that we were at was the home of jellyfish. And several of us went in the water, but Carol Ann got stung several times by the jellyfish. And so Mom herded us all back into the van and took Carol Ann to the hospital to get cared for. And although it was a really fun trip going there, the trip back was a little bit more subdued. To end that, Carol Ann was all right though. Everything was fine.
When I cooked for the work camp groups, some mornings I would have to be up there at 5, sometimes at 6, and because I had to do everything, had to make my biscuits and everything by scratch. I had to, after breakfast, I had to get everything ready to start preparing lunch. Then after lunch, I would go every other day. I went into Newport and bought the groceries because I only had enough space to keep a day and a half's worth. I only had one stove and one refrigerator. So every other day I had to go in and buy more groceries. On Thursdays I would go up and fix breakfast for the work camp group, and then as soon as we got through breakfast I would start frying my chicken, make potato salad, and they'd eat their lunch, which was usually some kind of sandwiches or something, and then after lunch I'd have all the picnic, which I'd have a watermelon, a loaf of bread. I'd send a big old knife for them to cut the watermelon with. They had to take the silverware and stuff because we didn't have any plastic spoons, so they'd bring all them back, and we would. Then they would eat. After the thrift shop was closed, I could get to come home that evening and not have to stay so late at night. And they would. They really enjoyed their picnic lunch.
Well, Boy Scouts, you could join 3 months before your 11th birthday. So I joined in October of 70, and 71 rather. And that next summer was the first big trip that Reverend Davis, the scoutmaster, and David Ross, the assistant scoutmaster, took us on. We went out west for 2 weeks. We stayed first night in Memphis, then Oklahoma, and it come bad winds and blowed our tents over and around, and then we went out and stayed in New Mexico one night. Then we stayed 2 nights to Grand Canyon. Well, I think I was the youngest one on the trip, and a lot of 13, 14, 15-year-old boys. There were 12 of us. Then we went up to Grand Tetons in Yellowstone. Went over to Mount Rushmore. The thing about Mount Rushmore, we stayed in that campground right below the monument. There's a campground there. And we got to leave school 5 days early because of the way Bob had it planned, and he let us stay. If the school system had not let us leave and go 5 days early, we would have been in that campground the night it come a flash flood and it killed some Boy Scouts. So that was a sad thing, but one memory. So we enjoyed that. The next year we went to Florida, saw Cape Canaveral, Marine World, went to the beach. 74 we didn't go anywhere because we saved money to go to Canada. In 75 we went to Toronto and Ontario. I saw the Montreal Expos play in the old Jarry Park. It was a minor league park. They were just before they finished Olympic Stadium where they played for a long time. So that was neat to go on those trips. And every summer we went to Camp Pellissippi on Norris Lake. We'd go over and stay, I think, go over on Sunday evening and come back, Saturday morning. And that was neat. You got to shoot bow and arrows. You got to shoot 22s. You got to do all kind of wood carving, weaving, with reeds and make little mats and stuff. Got to swim out in had big swimming cribs you could get in. And the boys that were going for their life-saving merit badge, they got to swim out the mile swim in the open lake. And they had called a watermelon fight. And what they do is they'd throw a couple of watermelons in that big crib, and it was 8 foot deep and had a bottom to it. But you had to lather each other up with lard before you got in there. Well, they told me to do it. Well, I couldn't swim good at all, hardly. Bob and float water. So they greased me up, and they threw them watermelons in there, and then they pushed us all in or jumped in. Well, I went under and come up and was gasping for air and trying to hold on to the side of the crib to keep afloat. And all of a sudden, that watermelon come right up under me. And that guy, I grabbed it, and it squirted out of my arms, and the guy dumped me. The watermelon went down, and it come back up again, and I just grabbed it and threw it up on the dock. So we had watermelon that night, and I was the hero of our troop. So that's kind of fun. But Boy Scout camp was neat. You had merit badge committees. My dad was on several merit badge committees, and you'd have courts of honor where everybody received their awards. I got my Eagle Scout on 4th of July 1975. It's a little card I've got. Has Gerald Ford, President's signature on it. So that was a big honor to get to achieve your Eagle Scout. Learned a lot, the Scout law and all that. Got a loyal, trustworthy, clean, brave, courteous, reverent, all those. And I think I earned about 44, 45 merit badges. So it was a good time. We did some community service too. But you learned to have a role in Scouts. It taught you leadership. You learned a lot about citizenship in the world, citizenship in the United States, citizenship in your community, environmental science, life saving, all kind of different home and garden repairs. It's just really neat to look back on all the things we learned and the camaraderie we had. And of course, got to see a lot of trips, got to see a lot of the country with the Boy Scouts. So it was really neat. I enjoyed my time in scouting.
Even with all the activities that I got to be a part of and everything going around the center there at Sunset Gap, some of my best memories were just getting to hang out there in the thrift shop with my grandmother and her sister, Aunt Tootie, who was my great aunt, my grandmother's sister. They ran the thrift shop there, and so as I said, if I was sick from school or it was a vacation day and my mom and dad were still working, I might have to stay in the thrift shop with them, and that probably sounded like it was boring, but maybe when I was 6 or 7 years old, it was like a wonderland to me. There was all kind of neat junk. Of course, there was always different things coming into the thrift shop, whether it was tools or books or clothes, but of course they had toys. And when I was a kid, when you're 6 or 7 years old, and there's new junk toys coming in there every day, I loved it to get to go through there, and even if it wasn't something that I was going to take home myself, just to play with it and leave it there, was a lot of fun. And it was just a treasure hunt every day, and that was always fun. Of course, after a hard day of playing, if it was 2 or 3 o'clock and I'd had lunch and I'd played outside and things like that, I might need a nap. And so they had big, strong wooden tables that had clothes on them, I would just go make myself a bed on one of those, especially in the back. They had like a back section that was mostly the men's clothes. And, you didn't have as many men that would come in as you did ladies. And so I was usually safe back there to go back there and not be in anybody's way, go back there and make a big pallet bed on one of those tables in those men's clothes. And of course, the thrift shop had a very particular smell. And if I still go in that today, it triggers a very strong sense of nostalgia for me, the way that place smells. Not good, not bad, just maybe old because you had used clothes in there, but of course the building itself was so very long. So if I walk in there today, of course now it seems a lot smaller. When I was a kid, I would have swore that place was probably like 2,000 square feet, right? And now I walk in there and I feel like I got a duck when I go into the room because the ceilings are probably only like 7 feet or whatever, and so it feels a lot smaller. Where I could say in my mind's eye, when I think back, it seems a lot bigger in there. But I used to see, of course, there was no TV. Even if they had a TV, you probably wouldn't have gotten good reception in the mountains back then. At our house, I think we got 1.5 stations, maybe. I say a half. The other one might have been fuzzy, which we had antenna. But there was no TV there at Sunset Gap, but there was a radio. And so one thing I liked to do was listen to the radio. A favorite of mine was Paul Harvey. And so a lot of younger people might not know who Paul Harvey was today, but Paul Harvey was kind of news and variety, and of course he had a great radio voice, and he would talk about news, and then he would tell stories, and of course if you are old enough to remember Paul Harvey, one of my favorite segments was he would start to tell a story and you didn't know who he was talking about, and at the end, a lot of times the story would be about somebody who was famous or significant, but it would be something unknown from their lives. And he would say, and now you know the rest of the story. And so I like to always catch Paul Harvey on the radio. They would have the radio on, and usually it would be news, but sometimes it would be country music too. I can remember, my grandmother and her sister Aunt Tootie listening to some of those older, of course again, back in the 80s, it might have been, Conway Twitty or George Strait or some of those guys there doing some country music, something like that. I remember sitting there listening to country music and things like that, and the things, they would always take care of me, feed me lunch, anything I needed, and it was just great because the whole day was just open. You had as a kid, you had no responsibilities. And I had a playground to play on, basketball courts. I had mountains to explore. So even if I was by myself, which often I was, it was just endless. I could explore the thrift shop or the grounds or whatever I wanted to do. And all I really had to do was stay out of the road for that one car that might come through once an hour or whatever it was. It wasn't always a very happening place. And sit around and listen to my grandmother and her sister tell stories and talk about people they knew and things that was going on in the community. Of course, like I said, sometimes my cousin Scott was there and we get to play together, but if not, I might be the only kid that would be around. And so I just I spent a lot of time with the adults and listening to what they saw. So I probably knew a lot more everybody else's business than I should have, but that was a lot of big time. Like I said, that was a lot of my early life there was growing up there in the thrift shop.